Thank you very much for coming to Found in Translation, online lecture by Ken Tadashi Oshima and a discussion with Mira Nakashima, Charlotte Raymond, and William Whitaker. This lecture is a part of the education program of the Shofuso and Modernism exhibition, supported by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. My name is Yuka Yokoyama. I'm the curator of the Shofuso Modernism exhibition and the Associate Director of Exhibitions and Programs at the Japan-American Society of Greater Philadelphia. Shofuso and Modernism exhibition tells the story of the interpersonal relations between Junzo Yoshimura, George Nakashima, and Antonin and Noemi Raymond, whose work is based on a mindful understanding of land and nature, and a deep respect for the architecture and the craft traditions of Japan. You can find more information at the Shofuso and modernism.com, and please visit Shofuso at the West Fairmount Park for an in-person exhibition experience. And also exhibition-related upcoming events are documentary film premiere on October 9th. This features all the tonight's speakers, and the premiere event includes discussion with the film directors Nadia Hironaka and Matt Suv of Greenhouse Media. On October 20th, William Whitaker is in conversation with photographer Elizabeth Vercella, whose work is featured in the exhibition. Tonight's lecture and the discussion revisits the legacy of Yoshimura, Nakashima, and the Raymonds following their architecture and a design project, and also discuss current activities and the lives of these sites. Tonight's speaker, Ken Tadashi Oshima, is a professor at the Department of Architecture at the University of Washington, where he teaches in an area of transnational architectural history, theory, representation, and design. He has also been a visiting professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and taught at the Columbia University and the University of British Columbia. He has a degree in East Asia Studies and Visual Environmental Studies from Harvard College, master's degree from UC Berkeley, and a PhD in architectural history and theory from Columbia University. He serves as the president of the Society of Architectural Historians from 2016 to 2018, and was an editor and a contributor to Architecture and Urbanism for more than 10 years, co-authoring The Vision of the Real Modern House in 20th Century in 2000. His article in the international context of architecture and urbanism in Japan have been published in Journal of the Society of Architectural Historians, Architectural Review, Architectural Theory Review, Kenchiku Bunka, and more. Dr. Oshima has organized architecture and design exhibitions, including Crafting the Modern World, the Architecture and the Design of Antonin and Noemi Raymond in 2006, which he co-curated with William Whitaker, tonight's moderator for the discussion. William Whitaker is the guest curator of the Shofuso and Modernism exhibition. He is the curator and the collection manager of the Architectural Archives of the University of Pennsylvania Westman School of Design. Trained as an architect and architectural historian at the University of New Mexico and the University of Pennsylvania, Whitaker primarily works on documenting, interpreting Penn's design collections, and curated over 30 exhibitions. Whitaker was an assistant director for the Getty Conservation Institute's project, Keeping It Modern, initiative that focuses on the creation of a conservation and a management plan for the Nakashima Arts Building and Enclosure in 2016 to 17. After the Oshima's lecture, William Whitaker will lead the conversation with Charlotte Raymond, granddaughter of Antonin and Noemi Raymond and a co-director of Raymond Farm Center for Living Arts and Design, and Mira Nakashima, daughter of George and Maria Nakashima, and the president and the creative director of George Nakashima Woodworkers. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and please enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuka. And it's really wonderful to join you at Shofuso. My backdrop is Shofuso, where I was in February before the pandemic hit, but I am coming to you from Seattle through the magic of Zoom. And we'll report that the smoke has cleared somewhat, but I understand it's reached the East Coast, so I'm sorry for that. But it's really wonderful to be part of this celebration of Shofuso and really understand it as the Japanese exhibition house designed by Junzo Yoshimura in West Fairmount Park since 1958, which really stands at the nexus of multiple translations of architecture, culture, and living. It's based on the 17th century Japanese precedents, but is a structure made in Nagoya, Japan, then was displayed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York from 1954 to 55, before finding its permanent home in Philadelphia. As a paradigm of indoor and outdoor living, let me put our image of Shofuso here. Here, as we see, as a paradigm of indoor and outdoor living between house and garden, Shofuso resonates with Yoshimura and a broader constellation of architects from Frank Lloyd Wright to Antonin and Noemi Raymond, George Nakashima, and their residences from Taliesin, Wisconsin, to Karuizawa, Japan, and New Hope, Pennsylvania, excuse me. So ideally, we would gather in person for this lecture and conversation, but alas, that was not to be. So that is part of the title for the lecture. Rather than lost in translation, perhaps we can look at more positively of what is found in translation here at Shofuso.
Ken-san,
yes.
I'm sorry. Are you meant to show your slides right now?
Yes.
We are looking at your face right now, so you can share the screen.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me see. Let me share the screen. There are always technical challenges, but here we go. Can everyone see the screen now? Let's see.
Yes.
And I will start here. So you can see the image of Shofuso from inside out, taken by Elizabeth Felicella during the pandemic. But let's see, here you can see an image of Lost in Translation, the film that came out in 2003, so some 17 years ago. But rather than once again seeing it as a loss in the translation, I want to really focus on today what is found in translation. And I think Shofuso has particular meaning during this period as we're isolated during the pandemic. Just this past weekend in the Wall Street Journal, this article appeared about the really long view and how during this period, and as we look to the future, it emphasizes, number one, that we'll crave nature and we'll yearn for Zen. And so here we can make the connection between this view from the inside out to nature, to Shofuso and modernism. And so as something very contemporary, very current of this period, I think it has particular meaning, and one that hopefully everyone will have a chance to see the exhibition, as Yuka-san explained, to really understand how Shofuso connects to nature and a way of living, not only through the Japanese house, but how it frames this living through these designs that we can see here, the furniture, the chair, rug, textiles of the Raymonds. We see the table and chairs of Nakashima designs, and how ideally you would have the view out to here, the garden framed by the post and beam architecture, the shoji screens modulating it, and one that's ever changing with the rain coming down as we see looking out, making that connection between the inside and the outside, or transforming when the sun comes out, looking at the veranda interstitial space between inside and outside, and one at every turn framing nature in dynamic ways, as we see here, and how it really is a work of art unto itself, and also a stage for living. And here we see framing the view out at the showing, but one that does have these roots from the 17th century, but was on display in 1954 during the summer to the summer of 1955 in Midtown Manhattan. And so imagining what a shock that must have been at this time to have this right in the sculpture garden of the museum. Here we see looking down on the garden, but how it was really a Japanese hit, as we see from Life magazine. New Yorkers flocked to an Oriental house, and the raising of the ridge beam here, what a really remarkable event that was, but one that really is an homage to the 17th century great work of Japanese residential design at Kojo-in, at Miidera, the temple complex. And it's here you do see the beauty of nature through this garden, and how then the living space is integrally connected to that through this post and beam flexible architecture. One here that was translated, this found in translation in Midtown Manhattan, contrasting to its surroundings, but really capturing that essence of nature, not only through the art, but how one would live in that. And as we see, transformed into Fairmount Park since 1958, lives on. It is a design of the architect Junzo Yoshimura, as he translated the 17th century precedent to make work for the museum and eventually for Fairmount Park, with a tea house in the back, one that would allow people to walk through, and how it really does bring focus to nature and the garden. Here we see the Japanese pine and the other foliage blocking that view of the brownstones in the back of here in Midtown Manhattan, but one that would be inspirational for architects for many decades to follow. So as we see here in House and Home in June 1954, how they're arguing that the Japanese had some of the best ideas some 300 years ago. Idea number one, post and beam for openness. Idea number two, big roofs for climate control. So obviously very contemporary to today. Number three, large modular parts for economy and flexibility. And so this exchange, it would be not only Japan coming to America, but America going to Japan with the post-war period and the occupation in Japan. So West goes east, east goes west, how all of this would play out. This does follow the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the most famous architects to go to Japan beginning in 1905, and one that would capture this experience in his own home studio at Taliesin, Spring Green, Wisconsin. Here we see the watercolor that Antonin and Noemi, or Noemi Raymond, would draw when they would visit Taliesin and understand this whole unity between house and garden, living and working the land, not only farming and having the animals at hand, but also designing. And so that would lead the Raymonds to go to Japan in late 1919 to work on the Imperial Hotel. Here we see a young Antonin Raymond with Frank Lloyd Wright above, Raymond from what is now the Czech Republic, working in New York, and then here in Taliesin, then to establish his practice in Japan, especially after the 1923 Great Tokyo earthquake that would have worked for him and his office for many decades, and eventually to his residence along with his family for some 4 decades. But I think what is most interesting in this discussion of found in translation is his summer home that he builds for his family, his office in 1933. That is a translation of Le Corbusier's Maison Erasmus, intended for Chile, 1930, but realized here for this mountainous landscape in Japan, some now actually about an hour by bullet train from Tokyo, but one here in which he, his family, his office could spend the summer when it was very hot and humid in Tokyo. We can see the staff up in the loft and enjoying this beautiful landscape as part of the daily experience. Here, not only the structure being a collaboration with carpenters, but the furnishings. And so design being all part of everyday life. While it might seem very rustic and vernacular, real innovations here of opening up to the landscape with these columns from the dining and the living, supporting this wide opening to the beautiful landscape such that the sliding panels will completely open up. Here looking up, that view of people working, but it's really this gathering of people. Here, the staff, the family, I think we can see a young Junzo Yoshimura here on the left. We see Antonin and Noemi. George Nakashima would join the office in 1934. So I think this is just slightly before then. But it would be a whole gathering in this environment, and one that would be, from the architecture to the details, very important. You can see in the monograph of Raymond's work through the details here in the inside cover, the signing by the staff as this whole collective work. But as I mentioned, George Nakashima would join the office in 1934, work on projects here in Karuizawa, including the St. Paul's Church, that would be completed in 1936. Here we see the impressive beams that form the worship space, but also these chairs that were a collaboration with the carpenters, but one overseen by Noemi and George, and really seeing the importance of design not only on the large scale, but on the small scale that would shape their lives. Yoshimura himself built a summer house in Karuizawa here after the war in 1962. You can see it's through the various seasons here, slightly in a more mountainous part of Karuizawa, but one with that view of the foliage ever changing, with the light, the sounds of a creek running through, and that being the basis of living. Homes do become very important as a real basis for one's worldview with nature, especially for the Raymonds. Building here, you can see some 4 homes, not only the Karuizawa summer house, but in Tokyo, the concrete Reinonzaka house from around 1923-24, a beach house at Hayama in Japan, but then also in New Hope, Pennsylvania, as we'll talk about in just a moment. And one that Junzo Yoshimura, as we can see in this sketch, being integral to. You see Junzo at all 4 spots, and how this dialogue between people, Antonin and Noemi Raymond. Here we see this in the Azabu studio, actually built after the war, but one where you see dining outside, which actually was quite novel at the time, was very important. And one that would shape these experiences. And here in New Hope, the threat of war in the late 30s and into the 40s would take the Raymonds first to Pondicherry and then back to the States to transform this fieldstone house from 1728 of Quaker origins. You can see it here on the top left as it was originally, and then here the bottom as it's transformed to really open up to nature, opening up those walls to have as a setting to work the land and have interns come, much like Taliesin in Wisconsin that the Raymonds experienced with Frank Lloyd Wright, and here to design like they designed in Karuizawa, Japan, with the drafting desks here with this view of the Bucks County landscape, or to eat here in the kitchen with the table and milk stools of a Raymond design, the ceramics brought from Japan, to integrate all of these aspects into one's daily life, bringing in light from above with shoji screens. So there's the element of Japan, but found in translation together with the domestic traditions of Bucks County, as we see here below, with the furnishings, the rocking chair, and so forth, which is this interchange, not only with the Raymonds and Yoshimura, as I've been mentioning, and one that he would acknowledge as really integral and fundamental to his work. Here are spaces that I find comfortable, as he wrote about the poetry of fire, water, and wood. As he says, ultimately, I feel that the basis of my design is to make spaces that I feel, that I myself find comfortable. If a house has a center of gravity, first of all, there is stability. from stability, there is serenity. I think this leads to a pleasant feeling. And so whether it be in his own summer house or in Shofuso, I think we can see that connecting the experiences. Here we see Yoshimura in New Hope, and here in the late 30s, working the farm with the cows, looking at the view with Noemi, how important all of these aspects are. We certainly feel this with the pandemic, but one that the Raymonds, Yoshimura must have felt during the period of war, World War II, and finding that tranquility here. But in finding the importance of friendships, so of the staff of Yoshimura family that continue to today, with outdoor long table dinners that Charlotte has been instrumental to bring together. So we do see this living legacy through Charlotte's work. I was able to meet up with her several times in Japan while I was there, as well as with Mira Nakashima. Actually first many decades ago in Japan, but many times since then. And one last autumn, just about a year ago, we were able to gather in Karuizawa for a symposium discussing these connections between Japan and America, Karuizawa and New Hope, which we continue today, as we see here. And one here in the backdrop of the Wakita Museum and Studio that is also of a Yoshimura design that has that same feeling of inside outside. And here, as we gathered last year, one that continues on. Another house by Raymond, actually, we see here in the middle Mira, and we see Charlotte, but one that Charlotte was photographing on her trip, photographing many of the Raymond designs, rediscovering that, as hopefully she'll have a chance to talk about further in our discussion, but one that has really been kind of rediscovered. This was the Oka House in Karuizawa, a little more neglected, but one that recently has been restored to its original splendor, and really bringing this back to life. We see actually Charlotte at the time in 1958 year, and how she actually discovered New Hope as a young girl, which I understand here we see how Charlotte grew up in California, but then went to New Hope in 1958 as a 5-year-old. And understanding the farm that Antonin had experienced in many ways in his own upbringing in Renkov in Czechoslovakia, and this importance of connection with the land, both of Antonin and Noemi, in working this Noemi's desk, and one again that is brought to life today through the Raymond Farm Center for Living Arts and Design, and brought to life through the photographs of Elizabeth Fulicella that were taken during the pandemic. So having that time to really appreciate how the light shines on the farmhouse, one that here we see in the black and white photographs was very active in its day, but living today, as we see in the beauty of the woods and the view out to the landscape, and one activated by lectures, and this from a few years ago when I was there. As we saw before, here it does live on. And one of the wonderful magical things about the farmhouse, and here the second story space, which hopefully we'll have Mira speak a little bit about, but she was just telling me how this was her first home as a 2-year-old growing up in this house, the third floor here, where the Nakashimas spent their time after departing the internment camps in Idaho, and through Antonin and Raymond's guarantee, could be a New Hope, and then George really focusing on the furniture designs. But one here we see alive with the chickens, very much part of the experience, and working the land, as we see through Charlotte's photographs of the corn and beans, and here how we see here up at the top right, working away, cooking for these wonderful meals, how it lives on through these wonderful gatherings. Unfortunately, not possible right now with distancing, but one in which we can really appreciate the landscape. And here we see actually Charlotte's view of the world is not only close at home in New Hope, but far away in Galapagos, taken last year. So her eye for nature in her photographs, this between Japan and New Hope, and her particular eye looking to this incredible landscape, this from her kitchen, as we see the farm very much alive, but how it's interacting and changing constantly, and adjacent to the Nakashima studios, as we see here in Google, up on Aquatong Road. And in 1946, the location for the Nakashima studios, we see a younger George and a Mira, I think maybe about 3 years old from what she tells me. And one that we can see this legacy of house and garden and living with nature in his George's context here at the art building that's now the Minguren Museum, completed in 1967 on a conoid chair. And then some 25 years after George's passing, the gathering of Mira and the gang, as we see here, some 5 years ago. But Mira really living and continuing this whole inspiration of design, nature between Japan and America. Here in the reception house, her brother Kevin's house behind, as we see, the main shop, and how it's changing at every view in this whole complex of studios based on the season, and whether it be in the connection to the pond or the detailing of the stair, how architecture, design really all come together. We see the showroom, the conoid studio from 1960 with the conoid concrete roof structure, really forming this magical space down below with the Nakashima designs. And here, as we see in this image looking out from the Minguren Museum, Nakashima's translation, both George and Mira and the entire team's ideal of living and working with nature between America and Japan. And so, like we saw with Shofuso, we do see the elements of the shoji screen framing nature, but certainly in different proportions and marked with the multi-generations of the Nakashimas. Together with the Raymonds, we can really see this living, especially through Elizabeth Filicella's photographs that were put together through George, through actually Bill Whitaker's inspiration and direction, and how perhaps we can really appreciate Shofuso in many different ways as being modern. So Shofuso and modernism really does live on, and I do hope everyone can visit, but I do invite everyone now to join in our conversation about this inspiration. So let me end this show, and I would like to invite all of the panelists to Charlotte, Mira, and Bill talk further about this inspiration. So sorry I talked on a little bit too long, but I hope we can continue this conversation.
Great. So if Ken-san stop sharing your screen.
Yes, thank you. Here, let me get my cursor up here. Sorry.
Okay, if I get a recording, I'll send it to you.
Sorry. This cursor is, let's see here. Okay, there we go.
Oh. You want us to show ourselves, Bill?
So we're seeing you, Mira.
Oh, you are.
Bill.
Yeah.
So I think we're all here.
Yeah, so everyone, its camera is on, and it's Ken, Charlotte, and Mira, and then the Bill Whitaker is gonna lead this conversation. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ken. No, it's been an inspiring project to be able to, really spend time with these places, with Shofuso, with the Nakashima Studios, with the Raymond Farm, but also to spend time with Charlotte and Mira and their families and their colleagues to really get to know these places anew. And the idea that we can rediscover these places and find new energy in them, has been a really great inspiration. And so I'm just wondering, just as a way to start to get into our conversation, just to help people understand where you guys are right now. And, so where are you talking to us from? Let's start with Mira.
Oh, I'm in the Konoid studio.
Yep.
You just showed us a picture of.
And that's where you have your office, so to speak, right?
This is our design office, and we usually have it open for visitors when we're not socially distanced.
Right. And then Charlotte, you've got a very wonderful background there, surrounded by horses and misty, morning mist. So where are you?
I'm actually, if I went outside, I'd be right in that view. It's getting a little dark here, but I'm on the Raymond Farm here with my family. And we just went through a big season of gardening. So the gardens are still as full as Ken showed in his photos. Been a wonderful year for that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just, these are such special places. And, before going in a little bit more into detail about your experience of them, I'm just wondering, how in these months of quarantine and of, anxiety about the pandemic, how life has been in New Hope and up at the farm and the Nakashima Studios. So what has stood out in your experience in these recent months, besides seeing me and Elizabeth so many times and the filmmakers numerous times? What's stood out for you guys? Maybe we'll start with Charlotte.
Well, as everybody has had, it was a kind of a shock to go into this lockdown mode and feeling a little bit anxious, but realizing that we are in one of the most beautiful places in the world. We have, we can make our own food. We've got nature all over around us. And we felt totally blessed to be here. We could go for long walks in the woods or in through the fields. We had the animals. We raised new chickens and new guinea hens this year. And we felt really blessed and still feel blessed that we have this opportunity. And working with you this year, we've gotten to know the house better. We've gotten to really take it over. I know the Raymond Farm Center was not having any events this year. So it gave us time to really reflect and feel the energy of the house, and really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Miro, how is the past 6 months? I mean, it was just on September 11th, of course, is another anniversary of involving great challenges. But that was 6 months for me from when the University of Pennsylvania closed down its operations and kind of sent the staff home. So I'm wondering how things have been for you and your staff and your family, because your family is living there at Nakashima Studios. How have the past 6 months been for you guys?
Well, we were really booked solid with all the programs that were supposed to happen with Shofuso and modernism and the Raymond Farm. And I had been feeling a bit overwhelmed with the number of tours and visitors that we have. We have traditionally had open house once a week on Saturday afternoons, that it was getting so crowded that it was not fun anymore. So we were actually in January, we started restricting entrances. So you have to buy time tickets to come in on Saturdays. And then March came along and we just shut down all visitors. So I've been enjoying the peace and quiet. I live right across the road, so I can come to work whenever I feel like. Our manager figured out what our employees could and could not do, and he arranged for all the people who work on computers to take their work home, which they did. The people in the workshop who had their own workshops at home were encouraged to take their work home and work on it. So we were able to keep going to a certain degree. I just really enjoyed the peace and quiet. And it was interesting, as Charlotte said, having the photographers come and just appreciate the spaces more. It seemed, without all the people trekking through, that the birds were singing louder and the crickets were singing like crazy, and everything was blooming and growing, and happy that there wasn't so much traffic and there wasn't so much carbon in the air and so many people tromping around. So I really enjoyed the peace and quiet. And as Charlotte said, I really feel fortunate that we are in New Hope, which rather than shut up in an apartment in New York City or something, we're very grateful to be here. And Charlotte encouraged me to spend more time in the garden. So we have things growing that we never had growing before. Thank you, Charlotte.
We also had time to go walk in the woods and collect berries and find new places for chanterelle mushrooms and hen of the woods mushrooms, which we probably wouldn't have had time to do. So that was a wonderful treat.
No, it's so wonderful to hear about, your enjoyment of these extraordinary places. And I'm wondering what, how in the case of you, Charlotte, how your grandparents, what they thought about being in New Hope, and how in this time where you've had this experience of this extraordinary place, what are the things that you think that they found inspiring about being in New Hope, being at Raymond Farm, the kind of combination of living on a real working farm, but also being dedicated to being great artists and engaging with a much, much larger world than just, New Hope, Pennsylvania?
I think they really needed it. I think when they came to New Hope, they felt grounded. They needed the connection with nature. And I'm sure I know my grandmother walked the fields and really enjoyed the views and got great inspiration from it. And I think my grandfather, I think they worked in the mornings on the architectural drawings and things. And then in the evenings or afternoons, they would work on the farm, toiling in the fields and with the animals. And I think that really grounded them. I think that they felt very lucky to be able to grow their own food and have the peace and quiet. And my grandmother just loved the birds and the animals and the plants, and would be able to just walk through these areas and just really understand them and understand nature. And I think that really helped her with her choice of colors and just to balance her mind, her artistics.
Right. Right. And what, they're I mean, you carry on the tradition of having animals, and raising animals on the farm. So it's always a wonderful thing to be coming on the farm and see all the chickens all over the place. What, the connection to having animals around, what do you think the interest was there?
I think being able to be self-sufficient was one, and also the being able to share and with your neighbors. We grow more eggs than we need, or create more eggs than we need, because we can share. And I think neighbors love to come and share with us. And for some reason, the sharing of meals is very important here. I think it gives you time to express yourself, to learn from others, to talk about projects. And I think my grandparents did that obviously a lot. And I think we continue to do it today with all of our visitors. There's something very interesting that happens just when you see people walk in the house. And when new people come in, their breath is taken away. And it's that walking into the living room and looking out on the animals are there, or the chickens, or it does something magical. And I think it probably has been doing that since they created the house.
No, absolutely. It was so important in the photographic project, the commission that we were exploring with Elizabeth, to be able to capture some of that. And I was really looking deeply at the old photographs, particularly of the kitchen, and to see that there are two cats in the image, and they're just very steady, or all the other animals. So it's quite magical. So Mira, your father was born in Spokane, Washington, educated at University of Washington, then at MIT, then in Paris, then spending time in Japan. His parents were born in Japan, and of course, after Pearl Harbor, your family wound up going through the indignity of going to the internment camps, but you wound up in New Hope, and you wound up first at the Raymond Farm for a year or so before establishing yourselves, your father, as a woodworker. Why did he stay in New Hope? Why did he stay? What was the draw? He could have gone anywhere.
Always extremely grateful to the Raymonds for sponsoring us to leave the camp and come to the East Coast. And my father thought it was prophetic that from these internment camps, we were brought to a place called New Hope. I mean, he just thought that was perfect. And Dad's job at the Raymond Farm was raising chickens. So it always kind of tickles me to see Charlotte with all her chickens because I'm sort of back to where I came from. But besides that, Dad realized that there was a very, very strong and vibrant artist community at the time. And he made friends with a lot of the artists who live in the area. And I think it probably reminded him of his days in Paris when he was being a bohemian in Paris. and I think it was, I don't know. And he found this little cottage down the road from where we're living now, where his first shop was. Those first photographs that you showed were not at our current site, but they were further down the road. It was very simple. And then he found our current site, which was a south-facing slope. And when he was working with the Raymonds, they were made very much aware of Kimon, which is like feng shui, and the location of the building on the property was extremely important. And so he chose the south-facing slope, and he built all along the top of the slope. And then he started building in the valley below as well. But it was very important to him to have this orientation to the sun and the water and the trees. And there were lots of trees all around too. And Dad just loved trees. So it was perfect for him. And I don't know, it was kind of just chance that brought him here, but it seemed like that's where he belonged.
Yeah, so beautiful. I mean, I mean, this project, allows one to remind oneself that George is really he's an architect first, and that, he was able to marinate in this experience of being with the Raymonds and working in the Raymond office in Japan, and then to bring that experience and translate it, to use Ken's term, into, an experience in the United States, and, to make a wonderful life and a wonderful, series, a wonderful site there. I mean, it's an incredible architectural heritage there. Um, and maybe I'm going to bring Ken in for a second, just, because we're kind of coming back to, visiting these places and more intensely engaging with them under the circumstances of COVID. We, in a sense, we were not sure that we were going to approach this exhibition in the way that we did, but COVID made it absolutely essential to do so, and to kind of create an archive of imagery and a documentary film that's really as much about the future as it is about documenting the past, and rediscovering these places in this moment, and the extraordinary times that are around us. So Ken, we had the chance to revisit, you and I together, Raymond Farm and the Nakashima Studios back in late February, early March, and also to make a quick trip to Manhattan, to MoMA, to see the opening weekend of Donald Judd. I wonder how your experience of these places has changed over time, or how in your experience you might be seeing them differently from when you first visited these sites, maybe in the 1990s, to now, some 25, 30 years later.
That's a really interesting question. And I realized how special it was in February that we could gather and appreciate both the Raymond Farm and the Nakashima Studios. But it is one that I visited first in the late 90s. And Charlotte, you weren't there, but I met your father Claude for the first time then, and it was such a memorable experience being in New Hope and seeing this incredible landscape. But I don't think the farm was nearly as alive as it is today. I mean, I remember the shoji screens were a little less taken care of and so forth, because there were renters there. And so, and coming back, I've just been always so impressed about how well taken care of and how much it's loved at this point. And, but the other thing is, I showed an image of when I lectured in the summer and it was really hot, the fans were going and so forth, but then with the cross ventilation it worked. And it's one that, every time is a different experience based on the season, based on who's there. And, there's a continuity of the land, but then it's also so exciting to understand how it is changing with this whole environment. And so whether it be with the people or the nature. And there's this saying in tea ceremony, ichigo ichie, like one time, one experience based on all this. And it's, I think, very special because of that, of this whole kind of confluence of everything that was, again, I really appreciate what it was in February. And I'll never forget, Mira, when we were in the reception house having lunch, that Charlotte, the wonderful soup that you had made, and being able to gather around the big table and so forth. And so, those things really do stick out in my mind.
The other thing that happens when in both at the Nakashimas and the Raymonds, when people get together, there's a magic happens among the minds, and people just get their creativity gets excited, like it was in many years ago. But there's a magic that happens when you're in those spaces that I don't think you can find in many other places. Absolutely. I mean, even at the lectures that you were given and others, didn't you feel that energy of getting all the right people and being in that house?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you're touching a little bit on, the magic of these places, and I think we've been, highlighted some of those qualities, but I wonder how your experience of these places may have changed over time, because of this moment where we've had this, let's call it this ability to step back a little bit and take time with these places and to enjoy qualities maybe we had overlooked, we'd overlooked maybe in the recent years because we're busy and you're going from one place to another. I wonder if you might reflect a little bit on how your experience of these places has changed over time, right? So what are the things, how are these places changing, but what are their enduring values? And maybe we'll start with Mira.
Oh, well, I was not really aware of what my father was doing or why he was doing it. And it was just, I grew up in these spaces and I thought, well, Dad's just building another shed or something. And I did not realize the connection to Japan until I myself went to Japan in 1963. And I came back for a visit from Japan and I thought, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of similarities in the way the spaces are articulated, that there are details in the architecture that are, the same as in Japan. And I didn't realize, what that all was until I actually went to Japan and came back again. And the way the landscape is integrated in between the architecture, and you see it through the windows, and the shoji screens allow this flexibility of opening and closing the spaces. And I'm still learning about it. And
We all are.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and it was nice just to stop and pause and have to think and appreciate and almost meditate on what these spaces are, why they were built the way they were, and what they mean for the future, and what we're going to do with the spaces in the future.
No, it's such an important part of thinking about the heritage of these places long into the future, long after we're all gone, that we want them to stay vibrant and alive and a relevant part of our culture, not just here in the Philadelphia region, but beyond. So Charlotte, I know that that's a really important part of what you guys are thinking in establishing the Raymond Farm Center, that it not necessarily be just a museum for your grandparents, that it be in a sense dedicated to making new art, and to continuing to engage with these places. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about about your vision for your vision for the center and the kind of work that you really want to be doing in the future at Raymond Farm.
Oh, that's a big question. I think in having something in the area that people could come out to enjoy in plein air watercolor days, or learning how to make washi, traditional Japanese paper making. I think those things are important, and we would hope to plan more for next year. But I think the bigger ones are the like Beyond Brute residential architecture and concrete that we did last year. I think bringing big people together that maybe don't know what the Raymonds did exactly. I think those are the bigger symposiums are what I think I'd like to see more. Mm-hmm. And the more we discover in different directions what my grandparents, how they thought, I think that it's really good to share it even in these times, especially in these times. I think we would like to have more artists in residence coming, especially maybe we're talking about artists from Japan come. We've had a few, and they've had really good experience. When artists feel that they can come in and just enjoy the space We think that Japan, it looks like the Raymond Farm or the Nakashimas, but it isn't always that way. People live in tight spots in cities, and to come out and just enjoy and do art here, I think that would be really important to set up more artists in residence.
Well, just, we had that, we were visiting together up at the farm just a few days ago, and we had one of the head gardener from Shofuso visiting with us, Sandy. And we were talking about the idea of just being able to walk out in the woods and really explore the woods and find, forage for food there. But it reminds me of, your description of your walking around the farm with your grandmother and learning to look very closely at the landscape and how that created the basis for, your understanding of art in a sense. I mean, it impacted you, just the way that she saw color in the landscape and drew that into her work became interesting. That seems to me to be, and we've talked about this before, about how one, allows young artists to begin to see the world in that way and have access to that kind of knowledge and experience.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother taught us, she was a walker and she loved nature. So she would go through the woods and the fields and point out the four-leaf clovers or the layers. She would always say, just turn your head and look at the landscape and see all the layers. And I think she was looking at color and texture. And I think that we can do that here today, appreciate the different textures on the farm. Through the woods, to the fields, and the way that I think my grandparents, the reason that they chose this farm was the rolling hills coming down to the ponds. And I think just walking those fields, you get such an appreciation for not just nature, but the way we should be looking at our art or our architecture, how we should be building, how we should be thinking about when we decide to build something, how you should look from inside to out and then outside to in and appreciate those details.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of my favorite views is out of your living room in the house that you live in, which is this studio that Antonin and Noemi Raymond designed for their retirement. So they moved in there in '74, and it has this corner window that looks out into the fields and the hills beyond. And every time I have the opportunity to go up and spend some time with you at the farm, it makes me feel like I breathe differently, that you take in the world differently. And I know that that's something that matters to artists and matters to, I think, all of us to be able to have places that bring that out in our everyday experience. So maybe a few more minutes of talking here before we open up and maybe ask the audience if there's some questions, and I can field that. But I wonder if there's some questions you might want to ask.
Well, I think this is so interesting, and and actually that photograph of the view from the kitchen is the one that I showed. But the importance of the archives and really understanding all of what's happened in New Hope and the farm and Nakashima Studios. I think Bill has been such a key person in all of this, in orchestrating and bringing in Elizabeth for photographing the work, alive. And so, and I understand from Bill, it was this really interesting collaboration of figuring out, where was this? What was that piece and so forth, and looking at photographs and so forth. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of that, both at the farm and at the studios, because I think it was so interesting.
Well, that's going to be the subject of the conversation I have with Elizabeth in October, so I don't want to spill all the beans. But I will say that, part of the interest in working with Elizabeth, it comes out of the time I met her back in 2016, and she's one of the few women to work professionally as an architectural photographer. just as in many ways architecture still lingers as a man's profession, although that is definitely changing. And Noemi certainly was a part of that larger history and the sense of change. But she was commissioned to photograph an art museum by Louis Kahn, and we have that collection here at Penn. And my colleague, the deputy director up at Yale, at the Yale Center for British Art, made an introduction saying, Elizabeth wants to come see the archive. And I found this to be an extraordinary thing. The idea that a photographer commissioned to photograph recent work at a building would want to stop and before starting their commission to actually come look at an archive. And so she did that, and she looked at a lot of the photography and some drawings. But at the end of the day, I sat with her, as I often do with the researchers who come in. I'm just, why are you here? Why is this important to you? And and that started a really interesting conversation that has continued into other projects, not just the Shofuso and modernism, but really, brought an incredible energy to Shofuso and modernism, because, with photography, you can make a new archive, right? You can build a body of information. And, I'm somebody in my everyday work here at Penn, I'm building an archive by bringing new material in, and we have incredible resources from the Nakashimas and from the Raymonds, of course, and others. And we use that in the context of a school for teaching young architects and landscape architects, but of course, many other things. But that idea that there's so much to learn from these places, but the idea of building a collection and learning from that collection and using it as a way to know the world, I think becomes very inspiring. So it's a very special opportunity in this project to do just that. And to have the collaboration of Mira and Charlotte and their great support and friendship and hospitality. I mean, I think, we've been joking. I've had 30 trips up to New Hope since March, and I think I put about 1,500 miles on my car to do so. But I do have to say that, I probably never would have been involved in this at all were it not for Ken, for Kurt Helfrich, for Mari Nakahara, for Christine Vandredi Ozano. These are colleagues in which I first entered the world of Antonin and Noemi Raymond, and certainly by extension, George Nakashima back in about 2002. And we had an incredible experience working very closely over the course of 4 or 5 years to really enter into this world of how artists manage to work in more than one world, and how those experiences can be vital and informative in work now, and how the traditions that you experience and the places you experience can be drawn into working in another place, so that it's not a cookie cutter thing ever. It's something that's very deep and almost spiritual in its connection. And that I think is very special. And so, yeah, but I'm the moderator. I shouldn't be talking so much. So,
but you are a critical person in that way. These friendships, I think, are so important that are lifelong, whether it be with Yoshimura or, and it's really exciting, as Charlotte was saying, every time you get together, there's something that's kind of inspired by this encounter. And I think that's really this magic. And one that we can continue on Zoom, but it's just these friendships. I mean, I didn't realize that I went to school with Mira's daughter, Maria, and graduate school for architecture. And then I ended up at the University of Washington, where George had been educated in college, and now have inherited, at least to bequeath, to preserve a table and chairs that Nakashima designs. And so, these connections and these friendships, I think, really do become very important. But I first met Bill in the archives, and that's where some of these encounters also really happen.
Can I just chime in? I wanted to point out the fact that the Raymonds, my father's very first real job was with the Raymond office in Tokyo in 1934. And from there, he was sent, in 1936, he was sent to build the first reinforced concrete building in India, in Pondicherry. And that was a life-changing experience for him. So we owe that to the Raymonds. And while Dad was at the Raymond office, his best friend in the whole world was Junzo Yoshimura. And he was just so grateful to Junzo for knowing all these beautiful places to take him around and show him what really good Japanese architecture was and why it was. And there were a couple of jobs that Dad did with Junzo in their later years. One was the so-called Japanese house for the Rockefellers in Bocantico Hills, where Junzo asked my father to do all the furniture. That was the biggest job that my father had ever had. And also we furnished a lot of the Japan Society in New York City. So they were really good friends, and they did collaborate later. And I regret the fact that I opted to go to graduate school at Waseda University because I got a real degree in architecture, and I could have gone to Geidai where Yoshimura was teaching, but he said I could only be a special student because I couldn't read or write Japanese. So, oh well. But I'm also I'm just really happy to know more about my first home in Pennsylvania, the Raymond Farm, and I was just blown away by the photography that Elizabeth did at the farm. I never, it's kind of like my own home. I never really appreciated it until later. So it's a wonderful experience. Being isolated and having these contacts be that much stronger.
One thing that that I noticed when we were working with Bill and Elizabeth is that we were able to see the house as it was in 1939, which, and living there, you don't usually treat it like a museum. So we were able to figure out how it felt in their lives, and we were trying to figure out how that room might have stood. Well, what we realized is that they constantly change. So if they would have guests coming in, that they would add 2 more beds in one room, and the other one would become a sitting room or something. And they were very adaptable. The house was changed in many ways. So I think you got a feeling of how they lived when they were there, how they shared with all their guests and the people that were working there. So with Bill's wonderful information from the archives, we were allowed to see back a little bit to see more how it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
And to find some of those beautiful, to match the time period of those beautiful objects of art, either the paintings, sculptures, or the teapots and all the pottery, to see what they felt and used every day. That was very exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, this is the great wonder of discovery or reassociation, where you go into a box that's in the barn and out pops a teapot, and it's the teapot that matches a photograph from 1940. And it's something that, one has, the associations had faded over time, but this project gave us an opportunity to reanimate those relationships, and to reconsider what those objects in this larger setting and these larger relationships are all about, and what they mean today, and how they can energize what we do today. But I wonder if anyone in the audience has questions, and that you can type some questions into the chat function. I'd be happy to, we can continue the conversation for maybe about 10 more minutes if you guys have questions or observations that you would like to make. We're in this webinar format in Zoom, so we don't see you guys. We don't know what's going on the other side of the screen, except for the 4 of us on the panel. So if there's anything that you guys would like us to explore, we'd be happy to do that.
So in the chat, we have from Molly and Jeff Bucknam to Charlotte and Mira the question about that millennial consumers seem to be all about minimalism, but they often buy knockoffs of great works your families have founded. From your perspective, what is the best way that the next generation can support and live the values of simple and good design in concert with nature?
Mm. Wow.
Well, we still make furniture, so
Yay!
And I think that from what we've seen from bringing out of some of Noemi's things out of the archives, just how beautiful some of her rugs and fabrics were, and we're hoping someday to be able to share those with others, and let them experience the beauty of them. Yeah.
I mean, I think we learn from the way that Nakashima and the Raymonds approached the work that they did, right, as a project unto itself, but then this larger setting that they brought, you know, that they created for themselves, and how they chose to do work, where they chose to do it. And, you know, so there's so much more to the apparent simplicity of things than meets the eye. And so I think it's very helpful to, you know, have these opportunities to really dig in to understand that depth of understanding.
But I think also just visiting all three places, you'll understand that simple beauty and how minimal it is, and you can learn to appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, that was in the commissioning the photography in the first place, just to be able to bring into Shofuso this space that is very difficult, I think, for a lot of people who might just be visiting from West Philadelphia. You know, it's an amazing place that's filled with calm and serenity and life and joy, as Antonin might characterize it. But to see that there's modernity in that tradition, and that modern architects and artists saw that, and to be able to bring photographs of Raymond Farm and the Nakashima studios into the space of Shofuso to help people see those relationships, this wonderful, austere, simple interior, but how that can inform modern work, I think becomes really important and interesting. There's another question. Let me see. Once Nakashima established his practice, did he continue collaborating with the Raymonds in design projects? That's for Mira.
yeah. I don't know of any. Charlotte, do you know of any?
No, I don't.
I don't. I think they kind of went their separate ways.
No, I think a reality of that is the Raymonds went back to Japan after, you know, after the war. They reestablished themselves by 1952 in Japan. So there really wasn't an occasion.
Yeah.
Whereas Junzo, you know, having had the experience of working in the United States in 1940-41 and having been connected to the Raymonds for 12 years before that, really was positioned to be the first Japanese architect to really find success in the United States. And so there was ample opportunity at the Rockefeller, you know, and Nelson Rockefeller's house, and then in the Japan Society, to continue to work with his friend, George Nakashima. So then Cynthia Altman has a question. While it is simple beauty in looking at the great variety of woods and materials used by Yoshimura, but also George Nakashima, oh, is it a question? Well, just it's an observation. It's just that it's astounding to see that quality and that range. Let's see if there's other questions. It's a little difficult to read the questions and keep the conversation going, so bear with me for a second. Yeah, no, just some wonderful observations about making connections between these different sites. And that's, I think, the most important thing about taking the opportunity to go visit the exhibition in Shofuso, to see the photography in situ. We chose a format for presenting the photography. The old-fashioned 35mm slide projectors are in use. So we've added, in a very subtle way, to the soundscapes of a Japanese garden. But it's also a different way of looking at images. It's not a screen that's, it's a projection. And you can hear and experience those photographs in the setting of the Yoshimura designed Shofuso.
One thing that I was so, I enjoyed so much of the exhibition, that it was, I didn't think that my grandparents' work, Nakashima's work, and Yoshimura would be so settled in that room. And they're like in love, they're friends. So all the pieces seem to fit so well and be comfortable, even though they're very different. I was delighted with that. I think you did a marvelous job, you and Yuka, putting those together.
No, I think that was so important because it was a way of honoring their friendship, is to be able to find a way to bring their work together in one space, and to have the extraordinary opportunity to do it in Shofuso, which is not your normal gallery space, I have to tell you. It's a pretty amazing place to see art in, and of course you do that just by visiting there, but then to bring new art in there, I think, is quite interesting.
There's a question on the Q&A from Marcia Borel, who says, it's so interesting, how did the Raymonds come to Japan and get so connected to Japan? That was because of Frank Lloyd Wright, right? And then so second question is, did any of us study Ikebana? Charlotte?
I have not studied Ikebana, but we do have a classes every once in a while, workshops at the Raymond Farm Center in that.
But the Raymonds, do you want to elaborate on how the Raymonds got to Japan and how they got so connected to it?
Ken?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the, can you repeat that?
How did the Raymonds come to Japan and come to be so connected to Japan?
Well, it's interesting that Imperial Hotel, was this huge project, and but Bill has talked about this, and I alluded to it. But the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake devastated Tokyo, but it really did produce so much work, and opportunity that would not have been the same, I think, in the States for that same period. And so, it's through all of these work opportunities that they developed such incredible friends. And through the office, it really expanded, I think, exponentially. And, that being both before the war and after the war. And, it's such a profound bond, I think, and one that is interesting in that, Antonin was an outsider, and as well as Noemi, but could see things with a kind of broader perspective. And then that conversation with Junzo would have an inside-outside kind of perspective. And Mira, I'm sure you have experienced this of Japanese culture from the outside versus the inside, and so how all of this would be part of this dynamic in creating a broader circle of friends and clients. So it was a very international crowd that would appreciate these multiple cultures.
No, I think in the 30s, there wasn't that much awareness of Japanese architecture, was there? I mean, I think it was brand new, and it was, Frank Lloyd Wright got all excited about it. I mean, it was this whole new way of looking at architecture, and Bruno Taut, I guess, was discovered the Imperial Hotel, Palace and so forth, and it just, all the way through the 50s, the post-war period, there was this discovery of the Japanese aesthetic, which was totally different from Western. And
I think that's a really important point. And, you know, Bruno Taut was very famous for making Quatre Villa this paradigm of architecture. But Bruno Taut was on his way from Germany and then went to Turkey. And Frank Lloyd Wright visited, but after 1922, never returned to Japan. It's the Raymonds and that went back and forth before and after the war. And so I think appreciating it from that perspective, but also, you know, whether it's the domestic architecture as we see in Shofuso being very important, you know, raising that to a much higher level, or contemporary and how that really connects. And so, you know, today we have far more information and publications. In the early 20s, it was a different era. I mean, it was starting to get to be published and so forth, but we know a lot more now than we did then.
So just a couple more questions here. I'm going to go back to the Ikebana question just for a second. And just to point out that in looking so closely at the photographs of Raymond Farm, it became very apparent to us that the Raymonds, and I assume particularly Noemi, made a great effort to bring flower arrangements into the space. And so in our contemporary photographs, we went out into the fields around the farm and picked flowers and arranged them in some of the vases and pottery that the Raymonds had kept, either that they had bought in Japan from the craftsman there or Antonin made himself. And it became an important touch that we brought into the photography. And it really, I think, did wonders for it. And then maybe a last question, because we're close to 7:30. Cynthia Altman is asking, when the Raymonds returned to Japan, where did they go? Well, they went back to Tokyo. And I think this is an extraordinary part of their story, is they had the extraordinary opportunity to make an extraordinary connection to Japan. And in the 20s, after that great natural disaster they experienced in the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, they committed to stay at that moment in time. They were maybe thinking of going back at that moment in time, but they stayed because they saw they had a future there. And while World War II was an incredibly challenging time, they recognized that the artists and the craftsmen they were connected to were still in Japan, and they needed, help to get restarted. And the Raymonds, through their connections at the Museum of Modern Art and through other opportunities, helped to shine a light on the craft traditions of Japan. And that was in concert with many others who wanted to help reestablish the connections between Japan and the United States in terms of our shared interest in the shared culture. And that became very important. But they had an incredible experience in Japan, so they were able to reopen their office and to bring back some of the staff that they had from before the war. And even, in one project, worked with Yoshimura right after the war to do some housing for one of the American companies in Yokohama. So, they had great opportunities and had a successful post-war career in Japan, doing a great amount of work.
One thing I just want to raise before we end is that these friendships are so ongoing, and looking at who's joining us for our Zoom webinar, there are a number of people from Japan. I know it's in the morning, 8:30 over there, but that's one of the amazing things about being able to connect this way globally.
So I just want to thank everyone for coming. I think this was a really wonderful conversation, and I hope that you all recognize the warmth of our conversation reflects, 25 years of friendship between the panelists, and that's been a great joy of my life and my career. And I'll just remind everyone that the exhibition is open until the end of November. And so I encourage you to get out of your quarantine, your house, and go out and visit the exhibition. I will also say that the Raymond Farm is going to be open starting the last Saturday of this month on September 26th and through November 14th. There's an opportunity to sign up for a special tour of Raymond Farm and to take advantage of the work that we were able to do in setting the house up for photography. And so there'll be some wonderful opportunities to visit that house. And then on October 20th, the photographer Elizabeth Filicella and I will have a conversation about creating an archive out of this shared experience. So with that, thank you, Ken.
Add something quickly?
Yeah, please do.
We first met Ken in the year 2000, and we were doing research for a Nakashima documentary, and that documentary is going to be premiered on October 2nd through Cameron PR. If I can figure out how to get that information to you, I will send it along. But this has been 20 years in the making, and it ought to be pretty good. So if you want to know more about George Nakashima, you might see Ken again.
And then just one more thing, there's one question about the exhibitions. And so we, William Whitaker here and myself are leading a tour for Design Philly in October 10th, 11th, 17th, and 18th at 10 a.m., which is the Saturday and Sunday morning tours. So if you'd like to join, the registration will be open next week. So come back and shofusomodernism.com and then check the program schedule and sign up for more events, please.
We want to sell out all the tours, and we hope to see you in person at a safe distance, and we promise to wash our hands incessantly.
Don't forget the masks.
And wear masks. So, okay, but thank you. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Okay?
Thank you.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Bye.